This is our final session with our luminaries. I'm very pleased to welcome our moderator, Dr. Summer Bizzurro. Dr. Bizzurro serves as IPG Health's Chief Medical Officer, elevating their network's unmatched expertise in medical strategy. Dr. Bizzurro holds a PhD in cell growth and cancer from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, a BS Research Intensive in Molecular Biology from Yale University, and was a postdoctoral research fellow at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Bizzurro is a member of ASCO. She serves on the Lustgarten Board of Directors and chairs the board Science and Research Committee. Welcome, Dr. Bizzurro.
Thank you, Linda. We asked the rising stars to ask questions of our luminaries, and I'm looking forward to hearing how each of you responds. But first, let's introduce our panel. We have Dr. Cristina Ferroni. She's the chair of surgery at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She's a pancreatic and hepatobiliary surgeon who focuses her clinical and basic science research on neoadjuvant therapy for pancreatic adenocarcinoma and cholangiocarcinoma. She has been the PI of multiple investigator-initiated clinical trials and is the current PI of the Alliance 21806 trial for resectable pancreatic adenocarcinoma. We also have Dr. Christine Icabozio Donahue, and she is the David N. Rubenstein Center Chair for Pancreatic Cancer Research and the Director, Center for Pancreatic Research at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Icabozio Donahue's lab also investigates the fundamental evolutionary mechanisms underlying metastases using pancreatic cancer as their model tumor type. As of this week, Dr. Icabozio Donahue is the newly appointed editor-in-chief of the AACR journal. Congratulations, Cancer Research. And finally, we also have, Dr. Zhenjian Ye. She is a professor in the departments of surgery and pharmacology at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She's also vice chair of research in the Department of Surgery and co-director of clinical research at the UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Ye's lab identifies and studies novel therapeutic targets for the treatment of pancreatic cancer. And of course, welcome back to Dr. Jennifer Knox. So with that, I would love to get to the questions to our very esteemed panel. And the first question is, what do you envision as the biggest challenge for an early cancer detection test? And I'm going to start out with you, Dr. Knox.
Okay. Thank you. So probably the hardest question you could ask a clinician. And especially as applied to pancreatic cancer. Nothing could be more important than this work, because obviously finding cancer much earlier stage is going to impact survival in this dreadful disease. I think if we learn lessons from other cancers, we know that you have to enrich for a population that you screen. Otherwise, you get an awful lot of false positives and false negatives or just noise. And so I think that's been particularly challenging in pancreas cancer because even the risk factors that we identify do not really predict for most of the diseases we've seen. But I'm optimistic now that the science, and we've heard some of that today with liquid biopsies, that I think the science, if it gets to the place where we have the confidence in the specificity and the sensitivity of the assay, the rest we can work out. We can decide how to screen people and apply it appropriately. So I guess I said two things there: selection and the advancement of the science now.
Thank you, Dr. Knox. Dr. Ferroni, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just echo what Dr. Knox said. She's a world expert. And as she said, I think it's an issue of enriching the population and making sure that you have the specificity and sensitivity so that you don't get distracted by the noise. But it is the key to us saving more people from pancreatic cancer.
Absolutely. And hopefully successful trial outcomes. Okay, our next question, Dr. Ye, I'm going to ask you first. What do you see as the greatest opportunity for impact in patients with metastatic disease in the future?
But I think that a lot of the rising stars have already alluded to the promise, I think, of the future in treating metastatic pancreatic cancer. I think that as we start to be able to understand the tumor and the tumor microenvironment and the immune microenvironment better, we can attack tumors on many different fronts. And that's what we really need to really move the needle forward. And as we have more options in the last 10 years, we've had an explosion of options. And I think that that is just going to accelerate. We have a chance to really slow down metastatic disease. And I think what that happens is if you look at other tumors like colon cancer, metastatic colon cancer and metastatic melanoma, what that allows us to do is to really change the biology of the tumors. And sometimes it even allows us as surgeons and Dr. Ferroni to go back in and take out the metastatic site. We've done that now with melanoma and with colon cancer, and the survival for colon cancer patients with metastatic disease, if they can get more surgery for the metastatic disease, is 40% and sometimes 10 years. And I think that's the hope for pancreatic cancer, as we can attack the cancer from many, many different fronts and have essentially sequential therapies to keep at it.
Thank you, Dr. Ye. Dr. Iacobuzio, what do you see as the greatest opportunity or impact for these metastatic patients?
If I have to say one thing, I think targeted therapy for RAS is going to be a game changer for all patients, unequivocally. And I'm excited to see what the next few years are going to bring. And, RAS happens so early in the process of developing a pancreas tumor. It's one of the few things that is in every cell of the tumor. The more it grows, there's so much variability. But KRAS is kind of a fundamental, foundational aspect of a pancreatic cancer. And so, if we can knock out the foundation of the tumor, everything else comes crumbling down. And KRAS controls so many things that our rising stars alluded to. By the way, outstanding presentations, everyone. I really enjoyed it. And what Jen said. So KRAS.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, this question is for you specifically, Dr. Iacobuzio. So how do you balance between clinical practice as a surgical pathologist and as a scientist?
The way I balanced it is I gave up clinical practice 10 years ago. There's this, especially when you're starting out your career, there's these terms like you're a triple threat. You're doing clinical work and you're doing research and you're teaching. And I just had reached a point in my life that I was kind of burned out. Mm-hmm. And I said, if I can only do one thing, what could it be? So I wanted to put my eggs into the research basket. I enjoyed the clinical work, absolutely. But it was just a difference and research is always changing. Whereas my clinical practice was, very routine material, challenging material, but research every day is something new. And I was excited to see how far I could go if I devoted all of my time to research. So the balance really comes down to the individual and what are the different priorities in their life. Mm-hmm. And if you love work and you want to work 80 hours a week, 90 hours because you absolutely love it, then you're not out of balance. You're happy, right? But if there are other things in your life that are important to you, you have to make a judgment on which to prioritize. And that judgment has to come from yourself, not from your mentors or your chairman or people like that. You have to have a conversation with them about what's going on in your life, but you have to be your own best advocate. You are your own best advocate for carving out the life and the career that you want.
Thank you for that. And that leads us into another question about work-life balance. So the question is, How do you navigate balancing responsibilities at home, such as taking care of young children or elderly parents, and also furthering your career? Dr. Ferroni, you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I would echo what Dr. Iacobuzio said. It's about what makes you really happy. And then it's not work. Yes, it's work, but you enjoy it, right? And finding your own balance is so, so important. But I do think that, when you have kids or aging parents, the most important thing is flexibility.
Mhm.
And if you can make your schedule, that significantly reduces your stress. And for my husband, who's also a surgeon, and it was really important to be home for dinner at 5:30, 6 o'clock, put the kids to bed when they were younger, and then we would both start doing work again. And that worked for us rather than staying late and getting home and not needing to do anything. But obviously, as your family situation changes, you need to be able to feel like you can do what you need to do for your kids, for your parents, for your friends, for your own well-being. And then you become a happier person, a more balanced person. And I think you're more productive because you are not resentful of your work, because you're able to address what you need to do.
Very true. And there are people who are sandwiched between having to care for both young children and elderly parents. Dr. Ye, what are your thoughts on this balancing responsibilities?
Well, number one, I don't do it very well.
I didn't say I did it well, Jen.
And not as smart as Dr. Iacobuzio O'Donoghue to prioritize one over the other. Instead, sort of in the space of I guess never really balancing well. But I think that it's I think family, whatever your family structure is really important. I think that one thing that was different for me that helped was actually coming to the University of North Carolina as my first job. Because I think the culture here, I find that at the Cancer Center and also the institution, that there is I find that both faculty and trainees do prioritize their family life and their priorities, outside work priorities as well. So it almost makes it okay to be more flexible, like Dr. Ferroni is saying. Like, it is just okay. And so that's been really helpful. I think, of course, having a really supportive family is also helpful. I have a physician who's a husband, but we're very equitable. I think my kids would probably argue that he does more than I do at home. So, I think that having a supportive structure, whatever that structure is really important. Having the leadership when you're going into your first job that's actually supportive and understanding of whatever your values are is also really important. And I was fortunate enough to have that when I first started out.
Thank you. Okay. So switching gears a little bit, what skills, scientific or otherwise, do you encourage your trainees to learn? Dr. Knox.
So I think everyone, especially if they show great promise, whether it's within medicine or within science, I think everyone benefits from a little bit of communication and leadership training, even if it's a course or something. I've seen many very, gifted young people kind of get themselves into situations, or they put their foot in their mouth, or problems over really perhaps not ideal communication within a collaborative or collegial environment. And there are a lot of pressures. I didn't invent the 24-hour rule, but I use it all the time. Never send an email when you're angry. And I was encouraged to go to some leadership training early on, and I'm not sure I thought I needed it, but the things you learn about how to be diplomatic and communicate better is so important. It helps you wherever you go, I think, in your career. So I try to direct people to get a little bit of that while they're doing everything else.
Great point.
Excellent point. Dr. Ferrone, what about you?
Yeah, no, I think I would echo everything that Dr. Knox says. I'm going to consistently go after Dr. Knox. That way I can just say I agree with everything she says, because, you know, I just feel so fortunate. I mean, the speakers are so great and inspiring, and it shows what's coming up ahead and the young generation and how inspirational they are. But, you know, my friends here on this call really, you know, are amazing, and they really help you develop your career. And I think that is probably the most important thing that I learned along the way is collaboration. And that's what makes it a lot more fun, to be perfectly honest. It makes it more engaging. And I think we all know we can't be an expert in everything. And if we bring what we're passionate about to the table, to the conversation, and we share and collaborate, I think that's probably what I've enjoyed the most in my career. And I would say that has made it, the most productive and the most fun.
Okay. Well, one of the things that can help us with supporting our careers are mentors. So the next question is, who are your mentors and how did you choose them? Dr. Ye.
So I think I don't know that I've ever chosen a mentor. I firmly believe that your best mentors are usually organic, and many times are the result of serendipity. You know, I had my first mentor in science was actually when I was a technician, and at Dana-Farber with Bill Kalin. But he, you know, I'm not sure that I understood what he conveyed to me when I was working with him. But, you know, in retrospect, he really taught me how important it was to think scientifically and rigorously and systematically. And that's, you know, that was a long time ago, but that's really carried with me. And I've had other mentors who you know, also around the same time period, Bill Sellers, who's now at the Broad, who taught me to sort of think outside the box and the enthusiasm that a mentor brings. And I think, you know, I won't take up all the time, but I think there's also sponsors that are really important, who really look out for you and give you opportunities. And I think that's something that Dr. Ho sort of alluded to. And I think that people on this call in the Lustgarten Foundation has been wonderful at giving people opportunities, but to really spread opportunities around is really important to make each other successful and to build the collaborations that Dr. Ferrone talked about.
Thank you, Dr. Ye. Dr. Yakubuzio-Donahue, who are your mentors and how did you choose them?
Yeah, I starting out with did not choose a mentor. I think the mentor chose me. I'm referring to Ralph Ruban at Hopkins, where I did my residency. But the thing about mentoring is it's very hard to mentor somebody who doesn't want to be mentored, right? It's an effort, and it's very painful if the person doesn't care. So I think when somebody, and it's probably everybody on this panel right now, when you're perceived as somebody who's a go-getter and interested in, or, you know, then somebody who likes to mentor will gravitate towards you. So I think that's happened with Ralph. I was motivated, and Ralph is always motivated to be a mentor. So he was really instrumental in my career. But I also, Ralph is not the only one. Scott Kern, who I did my postdoc with, but I've come to think of mentors as career consultants, because they can give you advice about a situation, but you're not obligated to take it. And I received advice in the beginning of my career that was very well-intentioned, with my best interest in mind, and I ignored it and did what I wanted to do anyway, because ultimately I think the most important influence in my life was my mother, who just always taught me, never give up, never give in, just always try your best. And so I've never taken no for an answer. And I don't mean in like in a social setting, something inappropriate. I mean, within the professional setting, I don't take no for an answer. I just keep going. And that's how I've been able to knock down a lot of walls, I think, is, again, it comes back to the advocating for myself. But also the final thing I'll say is I'm always on the lookout, and this is even at the level of my career now, I'm always on the lookout for who is somebody who really understands the ins and outs of how things work at that institution or organization or whatever it is that you want to succeed in. That's the person to gravitate towards, that I would meet with them and introduce myself and say, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I want to do, what would you suggest? And I've always done that. And yeah, so you know, in order to be mentored, you have to, you know, be what's the word I'm looking for? Receptive, yeah, receptive, yes, thank you. I'm a scientist, not a linguist, right? So that's my perspective on mentoring.
And certainly important to find those persons that understand the unwritten rules of whatever framework that you're.
Ralph was somebody that knew the rules down to the fine print. And that's what he taught me, and that's what I try to pass on to others.
Okay. Dr. Ferroni, one last point on this type of question around mentorship. What's important then for individuals when they're considering being a good mentor to others?
I think listening, you know, and making sure that you're not putting your own priorities on your mentee, but rather guiding. And I think the only way that you can do that is by really listening to what they're passionate about. But sometimes we like to hear what we like to hear, which is, oh, you're passionate about what I'm passionate about. And you have to sometimes stop yourself and say, that's not really what they said to you, but rather, you know, they want to take things in a little bit of a different direction. And I have to say, plenty of my mentees have been absolutely right in terms of, you know, a direction that they took research, either clinical or more translational. So I think that we as mentors have a lot to learn from our mentees as we listen.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we talked about mentorship. I want to ask the question now, what has anchored you during difficult times in your career? Dr. Knox, what has helped to anchor you?
So I think as a medical oncologist, there's lots of difficult times. I think everyone has kind of said it in different ways. I think we have to have balance in our lives. We have to have enjoyment outside of our work, despite how much we love our work. We have to have our family and our friends and, you know, even a hobby. I'm a bit of a passionate gardener. These are things that you can kind of go to and clear your mind and refresh, which are absolutely important. I worry about people who don't have that. I think as a medical oncologist, I think as much as I love my practice and my patients, I think it has always been the research, because the research is what actually gives me optimism. You know, when you think back on how things have changed even over the last decade, it's quite remarkable. And so that in a way gets me through some tough days as well, because I just keep thinking it's getting better. So all of that.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question, and I want to give everyone a chance to respond. And this is something that I get asked a lot. I know people starting out in their careers always want to know, what's something you wish you had known when you were an earlier stage in your career? So let's start with you first, Dr. Ye. Something you wish you would have known.
Goodness. I think the first thing is that it's okay to try and take some time to think about things and think about the direction that you want to grow in, and to establish those mentors and sponsors. to really guide you so that you're not really operating in a vacuum. I think that that's really important. I was fortunate enough, I think, to not, have a lot of support here at the Cancer Center with the Cancer Center director, as well as other people. I think having both a clinical practice and a research practice makes that even more important, because you need to sort of find people who sort of have the experience that you can look up to. And I think the other thing is to listen and to not take things personally. I think that resilience is something that we build, especially through medical school and through all of the PhD research training as well. And, there's nothing more, I have logarithmically more failures than successes. So I think that resilience is really important, but it's what you learn, I think, from those failures that is so important. I think I see a lot of more junior people and trainees too give up on research sometimes because it's hard, or something didn't work, or a manuscript got rejected. Dr. Yakubuzio. But that's like the way to, it makes you better when you step back and think about, okay, what is it that I'm conveying or that I did that might be able to change things? Like, how can I sort of pivot to make myself better? I think in all avenues. I think that works in medicine, in surgery, in research. I think that that's the most important thing, is to build that resilience and to take feedback, whether it's constructive or more critical, that it's not personal. There are actually ways to, you can overcome that. So I think that that's something that's really important as you move along.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Yakubuzio Donahue?
Yeah, I don't, the answer that's immediately popped in my mind, and the only one I have, I don't know if it helps with this panel. I think it would be that, one day you will become a mom, because my husband was also in residency. He was in residency at the same time, and then he was in the military, and he was always deploying, and between work and life, starting a family was always pushed off. And it was always that one thing that, I was always worried, is my job getting in the way of, starting a family. I think it did, actually, because when we finally wanted to try, we dealt with infertility for years, and it felt like a huge failure as a woman. But things work out, because I now have an adopted son who is the best, funniest, greatest kid that he was who I was meant for, and everything worked out the way it was meant for, and even now he's 12, and I was just looking at him yesterday when he was sleeping and just thinking, like, you are just the best kid. And all those years of suffering through infertility in private, people say, you're so successful. How do you get so much done? It was like, because I have a husband that works a lot and I don't have children. And I didn't consider that as a benefit for myself. So if I would have known back then, you will become a parent, Chris, and it's going to be amazing. So now I feel like I have the best of both worlds. I was able to do things in my career and accomplish a lot because I didn't have childcare. And now I have flexibility in my job, as Christine said, right? To be a mom and go to every single basketball game and baseball game, and I love it. But that's my answer. That's what came through to me.
Thank you for that honesty. Dr. Faroni, what about you?
After that, I'm not sure I have much to add. Oh, goodness gracious. No, but I think, exactly. I think there's different times in your life that you have to adjust your life in different ways. And I think sometimes it gets very stressful when you feel like you're doing kind of a bad job at everything, and, clinically, if a patient isn't doing as well as you'd hoped, you get a rejection letter from the manuscript you submitted, the grant comes back with a bad score, and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I've sort of bumbled everything. it's just a matter of balance, and there's always these ups and downs, but you just don't let the downs get you down. Enjoy the good ones, enjoy the highs to their maximum, but don't let the downs get you down, because it does even out. And as time goes on, you also realize that a lot of the things that you got upset about in the beginning, they just didn't really matter. And that rejection, it was fine. And as Dr. Ye said, you learned something from that rejection.
Dr. Knox.
Yeah, it's so hard to add anything to all of that, and lots of similar experiences in my life. I think the thing that popped into mind first was more career oriented, and I tell my trainees this, and that is don't be thin skinned in the beginning. That in those early days, one of the things I regret is if I put in a grant and the rating came back and it was poor, but often wrong, right? Like often they misunderstood the importance of something, and time would show that I was right. Getting too obsessed about that and complaining about it, or becoming more isolated was just not the thing to do. Really, everyone says this, I just didn't do it when I was young. Just tweak it and send it out again, right? And that kind of thick-skinned, because there's so many opinions and so much competition in that. And I think in the end, if you're dedicated and you're interested and you're passionate about your work, you're going to succeed. And so that's really the only regret I kind of have early on, is I kind of wish I'd just been a little tougher, but time makes you tough.
Sure does. Thank you to all of our luminaries and for all of the submitted questions. Great conversation.